Hello, my friends. Hello, and welcome once again to stately Vaughan Manor, where Roger and I have returned to talk about an essential classic of horror. It's one of the essential classics of horror, one of the greatest vampire novels ever written, and if we're talking about influence, it's the greatest vampire novel ever written, and that would be, of course, Bram Stoker's Dracula. A novel I've talked about before, I'll probably talk about it again. Everybody, it seems, has talked about Dracula. A lot has been written about this book. This has been endlessly analyzed and studied, and I mean there's been a ton written about Dracula and Dracula's themes and the importance of this novel. And it is an awful important novel. I am going to be speaking about it as an essential classic of horror literature, which it is. If you are interested in horror literature, you really do need to read this book, simply because so many stories that came after this book have taken from this book, whether they be novels or short stories or plays or films. So many of those stories have taken elements from Dracula. So many elements that when you read Dracula now, you see a lot of things that stand out as tropes and stereotypes, but weren't necessarily so at the time that this was published in 1897. Certainly it did take elements from older Gothic stories. You'll find a lot of those elements in this novel, although this was doing something different with those older elements. This is a novel about the modern world and individual lives in the modern world being Victorian London or Victorian England. The modern world being threatened by an ancient evil. This is not something, of course, that was original with Stoker. This was something that you'll find in a lot of books at the time. This was a tremendous period of creativity and progress, the Victorian age. And the inhabitants of that time seem to have really felt like they were living in the modern world of the 19th century, and they had left a lot of those crazy superstitions behind them, you know. Nobody in the 19th century, or the 19th century England anyway, is going to believe in things like werewolves or vampires or ghosts. Well, ghosts maybe. And fairies maybe, but vampires, no way. Nah, we're not believing any of that nonsense. Because they were living in the modern world. And it was a time of great technological change. And you would find novels at the time where you would have characters from this modern world confronting either ancient superstitions or an ancient evil or something like that. And so in a way, Dracula is kind of related to a book like H. Rider Haggard's She, you know, which is another book with those themes. In this book, a lot of it takes place in England. But in the beginning of the book, Jonathan Harker, a young lawyer, goes to Transylvania, which is completely different than the country that he's used to. And he's struck by all the superstitions and all the cultural differences that he finds in Transylvania. This book uses journal entries, letters, documents to tell the story. This was something that was very popular at the time. Wilkie Collins did the same thing. and so did a lot of stories and novels at the time. It's very effective in horror because that kind of epistolary format, it grounds the story in a kind of reality. It's easier to believe it as you're reading it when the format is supposed real life documents. And it's kind of like, that found footage craze that happened in horror movies for a while. Too many horror movies. Because the idea that this footage was just found someplace and is real life footage might help add a sense of reality to the film while you're watching it. Very often it doesn't, but that's the idea. It's very effective in this. Bram Stoker is very careful about details. And so you have real life places, you have train schedules, you have all of these details in the book that lend it a kind of reality. And certainly Jonathan Harker, in the beginning of this book, our young lawyer who's going to Transylvania, is obsessed with these details. He always wants to know what time it is. He's always annoyed if the train is going to be late. He's obsessed with time, for one thing. And he's in a place which is so different from what he's used to. He's not the kind of guy who would believe in any kind of superstitions, because he's a thoroughly modern inhabitant of Victorian England. And here he is in Transylvania, where not only is everybody superstitious, there seems to be pretty good reasons why they are superstitious. Because once he meets Dracula and spends some time in Castle Dracula, he realizes Dracula isn't just creepy, he's probably a supernatural monster who has made him a prisoner in his castle. It's no surprise to me that Dracula has become such an immortal character in our culture. A lot of that is due to the films. But nevertheless, everybody knows who Dracula is. Everybody knows what Dracula is. And so you're going to go into this book with a lot of preconceived ideas about who and what Dracula is. And a lot of those will be realized in the book, but there are other things about the character of Dracula that are different than you might expect. He's not Christopher Lee in this book. He's a pretty loathsome creature. He's just incredibly creepy. Something is wrong with his character, or something is off about him. He has, not just his bad breath or his hairy hands, although, those are bad enough. He's just all around a really unpleasant monster. And he's kind of suave, when Jonathan Harker first meets him, although right away Jonathan Harker realizes something's very different about this guy. His hands are ice cold. He's incredibly strong. He seems to be living entirely alone in his castle. He doesn't have any servants or anything, and it seems like a guy like him should, but he doesn't. He's all alone in this castle. Only he's not, because once you realize that there's something going on with Dracula, we already know, but once Jonathan Harker learns there's something going on with Dracula, Jonathan Harker encounters the 3 vampire women that live with Dracula in Dracula's castle. These opening scenes are great because they are so well done. Particularly the scenes where Dracula is visited by the vampire women who nearly make him a victim. They're just so well written and such powerful scenes. We get a lot of Dracula in the beginning of this book, which is important. for the rest of this book, because we learn a lot about the kind of creature Dracula is. We don't know the extent of his powers yet, but we do know that he is a powerful monster, and that he's straight up evil, and that he's moving to Victorian England because it's a great opportunity for him. So many victims, and none of them believe in vampires. None of them. So he's going to England thinking, he's got a clear field to, be evil in, and possibly create, a nation of vampires. Who knows? But he is a horrifying threat to the modern world. He is an ancient evil who is invading the modern world. And right away, he starts victimizing people once he gets there. The novel shifts its tone quite a bit once we leave Jonathan Harker in Transylvania and switch over to England. And suddenly we're introduced to Mina, who becomes Mina Harker later on. We're introduced to her friend Lucy. And Lucy promptly becomes the victim of what we know is a vampire. And we know it's Dracula. But the characters don't. For a lot of this book, we know what's going on, but the characters do not. And we don't see a lot of Dracula after that opening portion with Jonathan Harker. We see a bit of him here and there, and it's always powerful when we do see him. But he is this huge threat, because since we saw so much of him in the beginning of the book, we know all about Dracula, and we know how dangerous he is. And we know he's an evil monster, and he's a vampire, and we know the threat. And so he doesn't have to be on the scene. He could be lurking around behind the scenes. And we already know how dangerous this character is. But our hapless British characters, like Dr. Seward, have no idea and would not believe in a vampire anyway. Which is important, because it takes another foreigner. It takes Van Helsing, who exists partially in the modern world. He's a doctor and a scientist, but he also carries around all of these superstitious traditions, and he knows all of these superstitions, and he's willing to believe in all of them. He is a friend and a former teacher of Dr. Seward. Dr. Seward, who knows Lucy, who is wasting away. We know it's because she is being the victim of Dracula, who is slowly draining her life away along with her blood. But Seward has no idea. And so he calls in Van Helsing. Lucky for Seward. And eventually Van Helsing convinces Seward and some other people some other characters in the story about what and who Dracula is. And they band together to destroy Dracula. Without Van Helsing, Dracula would have been completely successful in what he was doing, because neither Dr. Seward or anybody else would believe. They just wouldn't believe that it was a vampire on their own. They would be at his mercy, because they live in the modern world where such things as vampires do not exist. And so Dracula is more than just a threat to these individual people that our main characters care about. He's a threat to their whole society, to their whole world and their whole worldview. And you really feel that in the novel as it's progressing, where our characters are being victimized by this horrific creature who is from an entirely different kind of world. He's an ancient evil. And it just works so well. Probably the most powerful parts of the book, though, are in the beginning and at the very end. In the beginning, we are at Transylvania. At the very end of the book, we go back to Transylvania. And the ending of this book is actually really, really good. I'm surprised that film versions of the novel don't use the novel's ending very often, because it's such a great scene. I mean, we got a whole chase scene at the end and everything. The novel works really, really well. There are a couple spots in it where it drags a bit. Lucy has about a dozen blood transfusions at one point, I think. And it was 3. She has 3, I think 3? She has 3 blood transfusions. Or was it 4? I don't even remember. And I read this a billion times. But it was too many. And, you know, what luck that all the donors just happened to be compatible with her blood type. Boy, that was lucky, particularly since Bram Stoker pays no attention to blood type, and neither does Van Helsing. Genius that he was. And Van Helsing is, I think, another weakness to the story. Just because he is occasionally so ridiculous. And Bram Stoker used a very heavy hand with Van Helsing, the character, in creating this over-the-top character with a ridiculous accent and way of speaking that seems almost comical at times when he really shouldn't seem that way. And there's a lot of Van Helsing in this book. There's too much Van Helsing. We would gladly trade less Van Helsing for more Dracula. You know, I think that would be a fair trade-off. Nevertheless, it's still an enormously powerful work of horror fiction. And it certainly is something, because of the huge shadow it has cast on horror fiction, it's certainly something that you should read if you're interested in horror literature. It is certainly essential. I'll shut up now because I've gone on long enough today about Dracula. This is one of those books you can go on forever with, and indeed people have. There have been tons of books and articles and everything else written about Dracula and analyzing every single aspect of Dracula. And it probably deserves that treatment just because it is such an important book. I will shut up now. I will catch you next time.